The scorching Arizona sun hung like a vengeful god over Hollister Creek as Hannah Thorne stepped off the dusty stagecoach, her face weathered by 32 years of hardship and hope. The year was 1878, and this forgotten patch of frontier had been her home for the past decade, a home that had given her everything and then cruelly snatched it away, leaving her a widow with 3 children and whispers trailing behind her like shadows. "Mama, look." Her eldest, Sarah, pointed toward the newly constructed general store that had replaced the old trading post. "Can we get candy?" Hannah smiled, adjusting her worn bonnet against the relentless sun. "Perhaps later, sweetheart. First, we need to see about our supplies." Her son Thomas, now 12 and already shouldering responsibilities beyond his years, carried their small valise with determined dignity. At his side, little Emma clutched her rag doll, thumb in mouth despite being nearly 6. They had just returned from Phoenix, where Hannah had buried her mother and settled what meager affairs remained. The journey had emptied their already sparse coffers, and Hannah knew the coming winter would be harder than most. "Mrs. Thorne." The booming voice of Frederick Porter, the town's banker, cut through her thoughts. "A moment of your time." Hannah felt her spine stiffen. Porter had been circling her property like a vulture since James died in that mining accident 3 years ago. "Mr. Porter," she acknowledged with a tight nod, "I'm just getting my children settled after our journey." Of course," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "But I wanted to inform you that the bank will be reassessing property values in the coming month. Your situation might warrant some consideration." By situation, Hannah knew he meant her struggle to maintain the small ranch James had built. Every month brought new challenges: broken fences, predators threatening their livestock, and the endless battle against drought. "My situation is none of your concern," she replied, her voice low but steel-edged. "The ranch is doing fine." Porter's smile tightened. "I've heard otherwise, Mrs. Thorne. A woman alone, forgive me, a widow with 3 children and that much land, it's hardly proper or sustainable." Behind her, Hannah could feel Thomas tensing, ready to defend his mother despite being half the banker's size. "Good day, Mr. Porter," Hannah said firmly, guiding her children away. "They're saying you're too old now to make a proper match again," Porter called after her, his voice carrying down the dusty street. "Too old to bear more children. No man wants a barren wife, Mrs. Thorne. Best sell while you still can." Hannah felt her cheeks burn but kept walking, head high despite the curious glances from townsfolk who'd overheard. At 32, she was hardly ancient, but frontier life aged women quickly. 3 difficult births and years of hard work had taken their toll. "Don't listen to him, Mama," Sarah whispered, slipping her hand into Hannah's. "I never do," Hannah assured her, though Porter's words had struck deeper than she cared to admit. They made their way to Miller's General Store, where Hannah hoped to purchase supplies on credit until she could sell some calves come autumn. The bell above the door jangled as they entered the mercantile, the familiar smell of coffee, leather, and tobacco offering a strange comfort. Ezekiel Miller, the proprietor, looked up from his ledger. "Hannah, welcome back. How was Phoenix?" "Hot and unwelcoming as ever," she replied with a tired smile. "Mother's gone now, God rest her soul." "My condolences," Ezekiel said, genuine sympathy in his weathered face. "Will you be needing the usual?" Hannah hesitated. "Yes, but I was hoping for credit until the door swung open, cutting off her words as a tall figure blocked the sunlight. Dust swirled around worn leather boots, and the jingle of spurs announced the newcomer before Hannah could turn. "Pardon the interruption," came a deep voice, the kind that seemed shaped by open plains and long nights under stars. Hannah turned to see a stranger, a rarity in Hollister Creek. He stood well over 6 feet, broad-shouldered and lean-hipped in the way of men who worked hard for their living. His face was tanned and lined around the eyes, suggesting a man of perhaps 35 who smiled often despite life's hardships. Those eyes, Hannah noted with an unexpected flutter, were a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin. "Miles Hayes," he introduced himself, tipping his hat to Hannah before addressing Miller. Just rode in from Colorado Territory, looking for work and heard the Double Circle might be hiring. Hannah couldn't help a small gasp. The Double Circle was her ranch, though calling it by such a grand name always felt presumptuous for their modest spread. That's so. Miller raised an eyebrow, glancing between Miles and Hannah. Well, you're in luck. This here is Mrs. Thorne, owner of the Double Circle. Miles Hayes turned those blue eyes fully on Hannah, reassessing her with newfound interest. Madam, he said with a respectful nod, didn't mean to speak out of turn. I heard in town you might need an experienced hand. Hannah frowned. I don't recall putting word out about hiring. Porter's been talking, Miller supplied with a grimace, saying your place is falling apart without a man to run it. Hannah felt her cheeks heat with indignation. Mr. Porter should mind his own affairs. No offense intended, Miles said quickly. I've worked cattle in Montana, Colorado, and Texas. Good with horses, too. If you've no need, I'll move on. Hannah studied him, weighing necessity against pride. The ranch desperately needed help. Thomas tried valiantly, but he was still a boy. The winter fence repairs remained unfinished, and the spring roundup would be impossible for her to manage alone. We can't pay much, she said finally. Room and board and a small wage when we sell calves. Something like relief crossed Miles's face. That's fair. I'm not looking for riches, Mrs. Thorne, just honest work. We'll see how honest you are, she replied, not unkindly. The last drifter who came looking for work stole 2 horses and my late husband's pocket watch. Miles's expression hardened slightly. I'm no thief, madam. Never have been, never will be. Hannah nodded, sensing the truth in his words. Very well, Mr. Hayes. You can start today. We're heading back to the ranch as soon as our supplies are loaded. The children had been watching this exchange with varying degrees of interest. Thomas looked suspicious, Sarah curious, and little Emma had sidled closer to the stranger, examining him with unabashed fascination. You have a gun? Emma asked, pointing to his holster. Emma, Hannah scolded. Miles crouched down to the child's level. Yes, miss, but only for rattlesnakes and such. A gun's not a toy, it's a tool and a responsibility. Emma nodded solemnly, apparently satisfied with this explanation. Hannah turned back to Miller. As I was saying, Ezekiel, about the credit, put it on my account, Miles interrupted, straightening up. Consider it an advance against my wages. Hannah stared at him, pride warring with practicality. That's not necessary. It is if you're to be my employer, he countered smoothly. Can't work for someone who can't feed their family or their hands. I've got savings enough. Before Hannah could protest further, Miller was already nodding and pulling items from shelves. Very sensible. What else will you be needing, Hannah? An hour later, they were heading out of town, supplies loaded in their wagon. Miles rode alongside on a handsome chestnut gelding, occasionally pointing out features of the landscape or asking Thomas questions about the ranch that made the boy stand taller. Hannah watched this interaction from the corner of her eye as she drove the wagon. There was something about Miles Hayes that didn't quite fit the typical drifting cowhand, a certain refinement to his speech, a confidence that suggested he'd once commanded more than just his own destiny. Where did you learn ranching, Mr. Hayes? She asked as they crested a hill that offered a view of the valley where the Double Circle lay. Born to it in Texas, he replied. My father ran cattle near San Antonio before the war, then I served with the Texas Cavalry. After that. He trailed off, his eyes distant. After that, I went wherever the work was. The war had ended 13 years ago, Hannah calculated, a long time to drift without putting down roots. But who was she to judge? Life had a way of derailing the best-laid plans. There it is, Thomas announced proudly, pointing ahead. The Double Circle. Hannah followed his gesture, seeing their home through fresh eyes. The main house was modest but solid, built by James with help from neighbors. The barn needed a new roof on one side, and several fence sections were visibly damaged. The cattle, What remained of their small herd after selling off most to survive the past winter grazed in the south pasture. "It's not much," she said, feeling oddly defensive. "It's everything," Miles replied quietly. "Good water, decent grazing, defensible position, your husband chose well." The simple observation, spoken with genuine appreciation rather than pity, brought an unexpected lump to Hannah's throat. "Yes," she managed, "he did." That evening, after showing Miles to the small bunkhouse where he would stay, Hannah sat on the porch mending clothes by lantern light. The children were asleep, the night peaceful except for the occasional lowing of cattle and the chorus of cicadas. She found her thoughts drifting to their new hire. Miles had immediately set to work examining the ranch, making mental notes of what needed repair most urgently. He'd spoken to Thomas as an equal, teaching rather than dismissing. Even more tellingly, he treated Hannah herself with respect, not as a helpless widow or a potential conquest, but as his employer. It was refreshing and dangerous to notice. A soft footfall alerted her to his presence before he spoke. "Mrs. Thorne, don't mean to disturb you." Hannah looked up to see Miles standing at the bottom of the porch steps, hat in hand. "Not at all, Mr. Hayes. Is something wrong with the bunkhouse?" "No, madam, it's fine accommodations." He hesitated. "I wanted to discuss what needs doing first." "The north fence won't hold if a steer leans hard against it, and that barn roof won't make it through a heavy rain." Hannah sighed, setting aside her mending. "I know, we've had a string of bad luck these past few years. The fence has been on my list since winter." "We can start there tomorrow," he said. "I noticed you've got lumber already cut. James cut it before." She swallowed. "Before the accident, we never got around to using it." Miles nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Best not let good timber go to waste. The boy can help, he's eager to learn." "Thomas tries so hard to be the man of the family," Hannah said softly. "He's a good kid. But he's still a boy who deserves some boyhood left." Miles shifted his weight, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "Mrs. Thorne, I couldn't help overhearing what the banker said in town." Hannah stiffened. "Mr. Porter speaks out of turn." "Yes, he does," Miles agreed, surprising her. "But I want to be clear, I'm here for honest work, nothing more. I've no designs on your property or anything else." The pointed clarification hung between them in the night air. "I appreciate that, Mr. Hayes," Hannah finally said. "Widows in these parts often find themselves targets for unwanted attention or pity. I want neither." "What do you want, Mrs. Thorne?" he asked, the question simple but somehow profound. Hannah looked out at the darkened ranch, her husband's dream, her children's inheritance, her own hard-won home. "To keep this place," she answered honestly. "To raise my children here where they can be free and strong, to not be beholden to anyone." Miles nodded slowly. "Worthy goals. And not impossible with enough determination." "Do I strike you as lacking in determination, Mr. Hayes?" There was a hint of challenge in her voice. A smile crept across his face, visible even in the dim lantern light. "No, madam, quite the opposite." "Good night, Mr. Hayes." "Good night, Mrs. Thorne." As promised, they began work on the north fence the next morning. Hannah watched from the kitchen window as Miles patiently showed Thomas how to set posts properly, the man's hands guiding the boy's smaller ones with care rather than impatience. Sarah joined her at the window. "He seems nice, Mama." "He's a hired hand, Sarah, that's all." "He looks at you when you're not looking," her daughter observed with the unsettling perception of her 13 years. Hannah turned away from the window. "Don't be silly." Mr. Hayes is simply grateful for employment. But over the next weeks, Hannah found herself noticing things too. The way Miles always ensured the heaviest chores were done before she could attempt them. How he carved a small wooden horse for Emma that made the child shriek with delight. The books he carried in his saddlebags, unusual for a drifting cowboy, and the way he sometimes quoted poetry when he thought no one was listening. Spring inched toward summer, and the ranch began to transform under Miles's capable hands. The fences stood strong again, the barn roof no longer leaked, and he'd even coaxed the old windmill back to life, ensuring a steady water supply for the coming dry months. More surprising were the changes in Hannah's children. Thomas had become Miles's shadow, soaking up knowledge about ranching like parched earth absorbs rain. Sarah had initially been more reserved, but Miles had won her over by treating her questions about books and the wider world with serious consideration. Even Emma, who had barely remembered her father, blossomed under the attention of a patient male figure. Hannah tried to maintain a proper distance, but it became increasingly difficult as Miles integrated himself into the rhythm of their lives. He joined them for Sunday dinners, taught the children to play checkers in the evenings, and somehow always seemed to be nearby when Hannah faced a particular challenge. The townsfolk noticed too. When Hannah traveled to Hollister Creek for supplies, she encountered raised eyebrows and knowing looks. "That new hand of yours seems to be working out well," Ezekiel Miller commented one day as he filled her order. "Ranch is looking better than it has in years." "Mr. Hayes is competent," Hannah replied neutrally. "Just competent?" Miller's wife, Martha, interjected from where she was arranging fabric bolts. "Clara Jenkins rode past your place last week and said she saw him helping you hang laundry. Seems above and beyond for a hired man." Hannah felt heat rise to her face. The wind was high, he was simply being helpful. "Of course," Martha said, exchanging a significant look with her husband. "Though you could do worse, Hannah. Miles Hayes is well-spoken and clearly responsible, not like some of these drifters." "I'm not looking for a husband, Martha," Hannah said firmly. "James hasn't been gone 4 years." "Life is for the living, dear," Martha replied gently, "and those children need a father." "They had a father," Hannah snapped, then immediately regretted her tone. "Forgive me, I know you mean well." Martha patted her hand. "You're still young, Hannah, whatever Frederick Porter might say, don't let bitterness close your heart." The conversation lingered in Hannah's mind as she drove the wagon home, supplies secured in the back. Was she bitter? Perhaps. James's death had come so suddenly. The mine collapse, leaving her with 3 children and a half-built dream. She'd had no time for grief, only survival, and now there was Miles with his quiet strength and unexpected gentleness. Miles, who looked at her sometimes with something that might be more than respect, but never pushed or presumed. Miles, who was slowly becoming essential to more than just the ranch's operation. She was so lost in thought that she nearly missed the approaching rider until he was alongside the wagon. Porter, looking smugly official on his bay gelding. "Mrs. Thorne," he greeted her, tipping his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "Out alone today, as you see," she replied coolly. "What can I help you with, Mr. Porter?" "Just making my rounds, checking on bank investments," he said. "I notice your new hand has made considerable improvements to the property." "Mr. Hayes is very capable." Porter's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Indeed, though one wonders what his real interest might be, a drifter suddenly taking such care with a widow's ranch. Perhaps he has his sights set on ownership through other means." The insinuation was unmistakable, and Hannah felt her temper flare. "Mr. Hayes works for wages, just like any hand," she said tightly, "and my personal affairs are not the bank's concern." "Everything in Hollister Creek is the bank's concern," Porter countered smoothly. "Especially when loans are involved." Hannah frowned. "My loan payments have been on time." "Yes, but terms can change when circumstances do. A woman alone is a poor risk, a woman with inappropriate relationships is worse." "There is nothing inappropriate happening at my ranch," Hannah said, her voice dangerously low, "and I would thank you to stop spreading such rumors." Porter shrugged. "Rumors have a life of their own, Mrs. Thorne, but I could help quell them." "A dinner, perhaps, to discuss your financial future?" The man's audacity was breathtaking. Hannah gathered her reins tighter. "Good day, Mr. Porter," she said firmly, and clicked to her horses, leaving the banker on the road. Her hands were still shaking with anger when she reached the ranch. Miles was in the corral, working with a half-broken colt they'd acquired in trade for some carpentry work he'd done for a neighboring ranch. He looked up as she approached, immediately noting her distress. "Something wrong?" he asked, leaving the colt to approach the fence. Hannah hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "Porter, he implied that your presence here might be compromising my reputation." Miles's expression darkened. "I see. He also suggested the bank might reconsider my loan terms because of it. That's illegal." "It's also frontier banking," Hannah said wearily. "The law is whatever men like Porter decided is out here." Miles was silent for a long moment, absently stroking the colt's nose as it nudged his shoulder. "Do you want me to leave?" he finally asked, his voice carefully neutral. The question struck Hannah like a physical blow. The thought of Miles leaving of the ranch without his steady presence, of the children's disappointment, of her own inevitable sense of loss was suddenly unbearable. "No," she said, surprising herself with her vehemence. "No, I don't." Something flickered in Miles's eyes, relief perhaps, or something deeper. "Then I won't," he said simply. "Porter doesn't concern me." "He should," Hannah sighed. "He has influence." "So do you," Miles countered. "You've built respect in this community. The Millers, the Jenkinses, the Rodriguezes, they all speak highly of you. Porter's just one man with money. That's not the same as power." His confidence was oddly bolstering. "Perhaps," Hannah conceded. "Still, we should be careful." Miles nodded, though something in his expression suggested he had more to say. Instead, he changed the subject. "Thomas helped me fix the chicken coop today. Boy's got a natural talent for carpentry." The familiar warmth of pride displaced some of Hannah's anxiety. His father was the same way. "James could build anything." "He must have been a good man," Miles said quietly. "The best," Hannah agreed, then found herself adding, "You would have liked each other." The summer months brought their own challenges, a drought that threatened the grazing lands, a wildfire that came dangerously close to their northern boundary before a providential rainstorm extinguished it, and a bout of fever that laid Thomas low for nearly 2 weeks. Through it all, Miles remained a constant, steadying force. He drove the cattle to higher pastures where grass still grew, he organized the neighbors to dig fire breaks, and he sat with Thomas through the worst nights of his illness, spelling Hannah when exhaustion overcame her. It was during those vigils that the barriers between employer and employee began to truly crumble. Sitting together in the dim light of a sickroom, taking turns bathing Thomas's feverish brow, they spoke of things beyond the day-to-day running of the ranch. Miles told her of his childhood in Texas, of the sister he'd lost to cholera, of the war that had taken his father and left him the man of the family at 17. He spoke of his mother's subsequent remarriage to a man he couldn't abide, his decision to leave home, and the years of drifting that followed. "Why did you never settle somewhere?" Hannah asked him one night, her voice hushed to avoid waking Thomas, who had finally fallen into a healing sleep. Miles considered the question, his face thoughtful in the lamplight. "Never found a place that felt right," he said finally. "Or perhaps I wasn't ready to stop running from what I'd lost." Hannah understood that feeling all too well. And now, his eyes met hers across the small room. "Now I'm wondering if I've been looking for the wrong things all along." The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken meaning until Hannah looked away, her heart beating too fast. Thomas recovered, summer yielded to autumn, and the ranch prepared for the coming winter with a prosperity it hadn't known since before James's death. Miles had helped Hannah implement new breeding practices that promised stronger calves, and they'd been able to command better prices at market. For the first time in years, Hannah felt hopeful about the future. The loan payments were current, the children were thriving, and the ranch was becoming the success James had envisioned. Only one shadow remained: her growing feelings for Miles Hayes, feelings she knew were reciprocated, but neither of them had acknowledged aloud. The harvest dance in October brought matters to a head. It was Hollister Creek's biggest social event of the year, with families coming from miles around to celebrate the season's bounty before winter isolated them on their homesteads. Hannah had initially planned not to attend, but Sarah had pleaded so earnestly for the chance to wear her best dress and dance with the Jenkins boy that Hannah relented. "Will Mr. Hayes come too?" Emma asked as Hannah brushed her youngest daughter's hair the evening of the dance. "I don't know, sweetheart, that's his choice." "He should," Emma declared with a child's certainty. "He dances good, he showed me." Hannah raised an eyebrow. "Did he now? When you were making soap last week, he let me stand on his boots and we waltzed." Emma giggled at the memory. "He said every lady should know how to dance proper." Something warm unfurled in Hannah's chest at the image. The community hall was festooned with autumn decorations, corn husks, pumpkins, and paper lanterns casting a golden glow over the proceedings. Hannah wore her best dress, a deep blue calico she'd refreshed with new lace at the collar, and had even allowed Sarah to arrange her hair in a more elaborate style than her usual practical bun. "You look pretty, Mama," Thomas told her as they entered the hall, the boy uncomfortable but handsome in his Sunday clothes. "Thank you, darling," Hannah smiled, touched by his observation. At 12, Thomas was already showing signs of the man he would become: observant, kind, and unfailingly loyal. The evening progressed pleasantly enough. The children were soon absorbed in games and dancing with their friends, while Hannah exchanged news with neighboring ranchers' wives. She was just beginning to think Miles had decided not to come when a stir near the entrance drew her attention. He stood in the doorway, almost unrecognizable in clean, pressed clothes, not fancy, but respectable. He'd trimmed his beard and slicked back his hair, and for the first time, Hannah saw fully the handsome man beneath the working cowboy's exterior. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and for a moment, the music and chatter seemed to fade away. Then Porter stepped directly into her line of sight. "Mrs. Thorne, you're looking lovely this evening," the banker said, his gaze a little too appreciative. "Would you honor me with a dance?" Hannah hesitated, reluctant but aware that refusing outright would cause talk. "Thank you, Mr. Porter, but Mrs. Thorne promised this dance to me, I believe," came Miles's voice as he appeared beside them, his tone polite but brooking no argument. Porter's face tightened with annoyance. "Hayes, didn't expect to see you here." "Wouldn't miss Hollister Creek's finest social event," Miles replied evenly, offering his arm to Hannah. "Mrs. Thorne," Hannah placed her hand on his arm, relief and something else entirely coursing through her. "Excuse us, Mr. Porter." Miles led her to the dance floor as the musicians struck up a waltz. "Hope I didn't overstep," he murmured as his hand settled respectably at her waist. "Not at all," Hannah assured him as they began to move with the music, "though I didn't actually promise you a dance." A smile tugged at his lips. "Would you have, if I'd asked?" "Yes," she admitted, surprising herself with her honesty. They moved together with unexpected grace, as though they'd danced together for years rather than for the first time. Hannah was acutely aware of Miles's hand at her waist, the clean scent of him, the way his eyes never left her face. "You look beautiful tonight," he said quietly. "Thank you." Hannah felt herself blushing like a girl, not a 32-year-old widow and mother of 3. "You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. Hayes, Miles," he corrected gently. "After all this time, I think you might call me Miles." The simple request carried weight beyond the words themselves, an acknowledgement that something had changed between them, that they were no longer merely employer and employee. "Miles," she said, testing the name. It felt right on her lips. The dance ended too soon, and Hannah became aware of curious glances and whispers around them. Porter was watching from the refreshment table, his expression thunderous. "We're causing talk," she murmured. "Let them talk," Miles replied, though he released her with proper decorum as the music ceased. "Would you like some punch?" Before she could answer, Emma came running up, her face alight with excitement. "Mr. Hayes, you came, will you dance with me too, like you showed me?" Miles's face softened as he crouched down to the little girl's level. "I'd be honored, Miss Emma, but first, may I get your mother some refreshment? I can do it," Emma volunteered, clearly thrilled to be helpful. "Mama likes the cherry punch best." As Emma scampered off, Miles straightened, amusement in his eyes. "Your youngest is quite the character." "She adores you," Hannah said simply. Something flickered across Miles's face, longing, perhaps, or a deeper emotion. "The feeling's mutual. All your children are special, Hannah." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the intimacy of it sent a shiver through her. Before she could respond, Porter approached again, this time with the town's mayor in tow. "Mayor Collins, you remember Mrs. Thorne," Porter said smoothly. "And her employee, Mr. Hayes." Mayor Collins, a portly man with mutton chop whiskers, nodded affably. Of course. Your late husband was a fine man, Mrs. Thorne. The town has missed his contributions to the community." "Thank you," Hannah replied. "James loved Hollister Creek." "Speaking of community," Porter interjected, "we were just discussing the importance of propriety in our growing town." "Appearances matter, wouldn't you agree, Mrs. Thorne?" The implication was clear, and Hannah felt her spine stiffen. "I believe actions matter more than appearances, Mr. Porter," she replied coolly. "A lesson my husband taught me." "Indeed," Porter persisted, "but a widow living alone with an unmarried male employee does create certain impressions." Miles stepped forward slightly. "Mrs. Thorne runs a respectable ranch, gentlemen. I live in the bunkhouse as any hired hand would." "Yet you seem to have unusual influence for a mere employee," Porter observed. "Taking over operations, making decisions, appearing quite familiar with the family." Hannah felt anger rising in her chest. "Mr. Hayes has been invaluable to the Double Circle's recovery. Without his expertise, we might well have failed." "Perhaps," Porter conceded with false sympathy. "But at what cost to your reputation, to your children's future in this community?" Before Hannah could respond, Miles spoke, his voice level but with an undercurrent of steel. "Mrs. Thorne's reputation is beyond reproach," he said, "and I won't stand by while you imply otherwise." The mayor looked uncomfortable. Now, I'm sure Porter meant no offense." "He meant exactly what he said," Miles cut in. "He's been trying to force Mrs. Thorne to sell her ranch since before I arrived. When she refused, he resorted to spreading rumors and innuendo." Porter's face flushed with anger. "How dare you?" "I've only ever had the community's best interests at heart." "You've had your own interests at heart," Miles countered. "That land has water rights you've been trying to control for years." Mayor Collins looked between them with growing concern. "These are serious allegations, Mr. Hayes." "They're true," came a new voice, and Hannah turned to see Ezekiel Miller joining their circle. "Porter's been buying up water rights all along the creek. He offered to buy my store last month when I mentioned business was slow, said he could foreclose on half the properties in town if he wanted to." A murmur went through the nearby dancers who had stopped to listen. Porter's face went from red to white. "This is absurd," he spluttered. "Miller's bitter because I refused him a loan extension." "Is that why you refused the Rodriguez family too?" asked Martha Miller, joining her husband. "And the Wilsons, and Hannah when James died." The mayor's expression had grown increasingly grave. "Porter, I think we need to have a discussion about the bank's practices, in private." As the mayor led a protesting Porter away, Hannah found herself surrounded by neighbors expressing support and sharing their own stories of the banker's manipulations. "You've had a rough deal, Hannah," Ezekiel said kindly, "but you've handled it with grace. James would be proud." The evening shifted dramatically after that. Where there had been whispers and judgment, Hannah now found genuine warmth and inclusion. She danced again with Miles, and then with several neighboring ranchers who suddenly seemed eager to discuss cattle breeding and water management with the Thorne outfit. It was late when they finally headed home, the children sleepy but happy in the back of the wagon. Miles rode alongside, occasionally humming snatches of the dance tunes. When they reached the ranch, he helped carry a sleeping Emma inside while Hannah led a stumbling Thomas and Sarah to their beds. They met on the porch afterward, the night clear and star-filled around them. "Thank you," Hannah said softly, "for defending me, for everything, really." Miles leaned against the porch railing, his face half in shadow. Porter had it coming, and I meant what I said. Your reputation is beyond reproach. Perhaps, Hannah sighed, but he wasn't entirely wrong. People do talk about us. Let them, Miles said with unexpected fierceness. Hannah, he stopped, seeming to search for words. I didn't come here looking for anything but work. I'd been drifting so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to belong somewhere, to be needed, to what? Hannah asked when he trailed off. To love, he finished simply. I love your children, I love this land, and I love you, Hannah Thorne. I've loved you since that first day when you stood up to Porter in town, dust on your skirts and fire in your eyes. The declaration hung in the night air between them, honest and unadorned. Hannah felt tears prick her eyes, a tangle of emotion rising in her throat. I'm a widow with 3 children, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm 32 years old. People say I'm too old to bear more children, too set in my ways to be a proper wife again. Miles closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. I don't want a proper wife, I want you stubborn, proud, magnificent you, as for children. His thumb traced circles on her palm. You've already birthed my future, Hannah. Sarah, Thomas, Emma, they're more than enough, they're everything. A tear slipped down Hannah's cheek. Are you certain? This life isn't easy, I'm not easy. I've never been more certain of anything, Miles said, reaching up to gently brush away her tear. I love you, Hannah. If you'll have me, I want to build a life here, with all of you. In answer, Hannah rose on tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, then deepening as Miles's arms encircled her, drawing her close against him. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing unsteadily. Is that a yes? Miles asked, his voice rough with emotion. Hannah laughed softly, joy bubbling up from some long-dormant place inside her. Yes, Miles Hayes, that's a yes. They were married that Christmas, in a ceremony that brought together the entire community. Mayor Collins officiated, Porter having been removed from his position at the bank after investigations revealed his questionable practices. Sarah stood as Hannah's attendant, while Thomas proudly gave his mother away. Emma scattered pine needles instead of flower petals, declaring them more Christmas why. As Miles slipped a simple gold band onto Hannah's finger, he repeated the words he'd said that night on the porch. You've already birthed my future. Spring brought new calves to the double circle, stronger and healthier than any previous year. It also brought unexpected news Hannah was with child. But I thought, she began when the doctor confirmed her suspicions. Thought what? That 32 was ancient, the doctor chuckled. Nonsense, women bear healthy children well into their 40s. You're strong as a horse, Hannah Hayes. When she told Miles that evening, his face lit with a joy that matched her own. So much for town gossip, he said, gathering her into his arms. Though I meant what I said, your children were always enough for me. Our children, Hannah corrected him gently, all 4 of them now. Miles pressed a hand to her still flat stomach, wonder in his eyes. Our children, he agreed, our future. On a bright September day the following year, Hannah gave birth to a son they named James Miles Hayes, honoring both the past and the present. As she watched Miles rock their newborn, Thomas and Sarah peering over his shoulders while Emma solemnly touched her baby brother's tiny fingers, Hannah felt a completeness she had once thought lost forever. The double circle flourished under their joint care, eventually becoming one of the most prosperous ranches in the territory. Thomas grew up to be a master carpenter who designed and built the town's new schoolhouse. Sarah became a teacher, her mother's determination and her stepfather's love of books shaping her path. Emma, to everyone's surprise, developed a talent for horse breeding that transformed the ranch's fortunes further. And little James grew up hearing the story of how his father had ridden into Hollister Creek looking for work and found a family instead, and how his mother had been strong enough to build one life from the ashes of another, proving that it's never too late for love to take root and flourish in even the harshest landscape. Years later, when their grandchildren gathered around the fireplace in the expanded ranch house, Miles would wink at Hannah across the room and say, Best decision I ever made was walking into that general store. And Hannah, her hair now streaked with silver but her eyes still bright, would smile and reply, best decision I ever made was saying yes.